Jason Roberts, the CEO of Roberts Technologies, stepped out of his sleek black SUV as it rolled to a stop in front of a prestigious hotel in downtown San Francisco. The towering building, with its glass facade and polished marble floors, stood as a symbol of elegance and success in the heart of the city. Jason adjusted the cuff of his crisp navy suit, the fabric catching the morning light. Everything about him, from his perfectly tailored suit to his polished Italian leather shoes, radiated intention and professionalism. He wasn't just any CEO. Jason was a leader in the tech industry, a man who had built his company from the ground up. Today, he was here for something important, the annual tech summit that he had organized. It was the kind of event that brought together some of the most influential investors and thought leaders in the world. But as Jason approached the hotel entrance, the valet didn't acknowledge him. Instead, the young man glanced at him briefly, then turned away, pretending to check his phone. For a moment, Jason hesitated, wondering if he had been mistaken. He cleared his throat and walked toward the valet, holding his car keys loosely in his hand. "Can you park this one?" the valet asked, gesturing past Jason to the next car, without even looking up at him. Jason stood still for a moment, processing the situation. His stomach tightened, but he said nothing. He took his keys back and parked his own car, stepping out with quiet determination. The moment didn't feel right, but he carried on without a word. When Jason reached the hotel's front door, he was met with a lukewarm greeting from the receptionist. She barely looked up as he approached, too busy with her computer screen to acknowledge his presence. "Can I help you?" she asked, barely lifting her eyes. Jason cleared his throat. "I'm here for the SummitNet conference. I believe you have the Redwood room reserved for us." The receptionist glanced up at him briefly before looking back down at her screen. "Do you work for one of the vendors?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "No, I'm the CEO," Jason replied evenly. Her expression flickered with the briefest hint of surprise, but it quickly disappeared. "Right," she said flatly. "Could you wait outside for a moment? We're still prepping the space." Jason stood there for a moment, surprised by her dismissive tone. He wasn't just any guest, he was the reason the event was happening, the organizer and the keynote speaker. He had planned every detail of the summit, including the booking with this hotel, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of who he was. Instead, she repeated her request. "Please wait outside." Jason's patience was tested, but he remained calm. "I'm also the keynote speaker," he added, trying to convey the gravity of the situation. But the receptionist only gave him a tight, forced smile, not bothering to apologize. A young man, presumably a security guard or staff member, appeared behind her and looked Jason up and down, sizing him up. "You with security?" He asked, his tone low, as though speaking to someone who didn't belong. Jason held his ground. "No, I'm Darius Roberts," he said, using his full name. "The conference you're hosting today, I run it." There was a beat of silence before the young man finally responded, his voice shifting. "Just give us a few, sir. We'll call someone to come get you." Jason's heart raced, but he kept his tone level. "I'll wait inside," he replied, stepping closer to the door. As Jason waited, a couple of early investors arrived, one of whom, a white man in a grey plaid suit, was immediately greeted with handshakes and warm smiles. No one asked him to wait outside. Jason caught the investor's eye, but the man barely noticed him and walked on without a second glance, escorted by the very same staff who had just ignored Jason. Standing outside now, Jason watched as people arrived and moved forward with ease, but he was still left in the cold. The discomfort in his chest grew. He was a grown man, a successful CEO who had built a company from scratch, yet he was being treated as though he didn't belong. The silence inside the hotel contrasted with the quiet life moving on around him, the sound of a bus stopping across the street, a mother pushing a stroller. Life seemed to move forward without him, and that thought cut deeper than he expected. Jason checked his watch. It was 8:09 a.m. He had a few more minutes before his speech was set to start, but something was boiling inside him. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, something he couldn't quite place yet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Michael, his assistant. "Boss, just checking. Did they greet you yet?" Jason stared at the hotel's glass doors. Not exactly, he said calmly. They asked me to wait outside. There was a pause on the other end. Michael had worked with Jason long enough to know that when he spoke like this, measured without inflection, it meant he wasn't just reporting something, he was processing it. Want me to come down? Michael asked, his voice low but alert. Jason shook his head. No, stay with the investors. They'll be arriving in the next 15. Let me handle this. He straightened his tie and walked back into the hotel, his mind already set on what he would do next. The receptionist saw him return, but didn't seem to recognize the gravity of the situation. She said, I thought I asked you to wait outside, sir, tapping her keyboard as if nothing had changed. Jason's voice was calm as he replied, I waited. Now I'd like to speak with the event coordinator. There was no anger in his voice, just the quiet authority of a man who knew he had earned the right to be where he was. I'm Jason Roberts. I'm the founder and CEO of Roberts Technologies. We booked the Redwood Room and 2 floors of your suites for this conference. The receptionist's eyes flickered with doubt, but she said nothing. Can you call Gina from events? She asked the young man with the walkie-talkie, who nodded and walked off. Jason stood his ground, waiting for someone to finally see him for who he was. This was just the beginning of Jason's quiet stand against the ignorance he had faced every day as a black man in a high-powered position. What would unfold next would be a lesson in leadership, respect, and the power of walking away from a room that didn't deserve you. Jason stood outside the hotel, a steady calmness enveloping him. The brisk morning air did little to shake his resolve. He glanced at his watch again. It was now 8:15 a.m., less than 45 minutes until his keynote address was scheduled to begin. People continued to pass him by, moving effortlessly into the hotel, not once acknowledging his presence. The valet, the receptionist, even the security guard had dismissed him with a wave, as though he were nothing more than a background figure. Despite the cool composure on the outside, something inside him began to shift. It wasn't anger, but a quiet, growing certainty that this moment was one he couldn't ignore. Jason had faced this kind of dismissive behavior before, only this time it wasn't going to slide. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Michael, his assistant. Jason swiped the screen, knowing what was coming next. Hey, boss, just checking in. Everything. Okay. Michael's voice carried a slight tension, knowing full well that Jason's calm tone was often a precursor to something more serious. Jason sighed, his voice level, but with a trace of weariness. Not exactly. They asked me to wait outside, Michael. No greeting, no recognition. Just told to stand out here like I didn't belong. He could hear the pause on the other end, Michael processing the information. He knew Jason well enough to recognize the subtle shift in his tone. Do you want me to come down? Michael asked. His voice filled with concern. Jason shook his head, although Michael couldn't see it. Stay with the investors. I'll handle this. Just make sure they're ready to go when it's time. Jason hung up, his grip tightening on the phone before he slid it back into his pocket. He took a slow breath, adjusting the collar of his navy suit. This wasn't the first time he had been underestimated or overlooked as the CEO of Roberts Technologies. A company that managed billions in assets, Jason was used to being the only black face in a room full of executives. But today, standing outside a luxury hotel in the heart of San Francisco, something felt different. He wasn't just going to accept the dismissive treatment. It wasn't just about him. It was about the message this hotel was sending. He had organized this summit, bringing some of the most influential investors and thought leaders together. This was his event, and he wasn't going to let them forget that. With a calm resolve, Jason straightened his tie and turned back toward the hotel entrance. He walked with purpose, each step echoing his growing certainty. As he entered the lobby, he noticed the same receptionist who had previously ignored him. Still sitting at her desk, her eyes focused on her computer screen. She didn't acknowledge him as he walked in her fingers, tapping the keys with mechanical precision. Jason approached the front desk, standing tall as he placed his hands on the counter. I'm Jason Roberts. He began, his voice steady but firm. I'm the CEO of Roberts Technologies. I've organized this entire summit, and I'm not a guest here. I'm the keynote speaker, the receptionist. Finally looked up, her face momentarily flickering with recognition, but she didn't apologize. She simply blinked, looking as though she was trying to work out whether this was some sort of joke. I'd like to speak with the event coordinator. Jason continued, his tone unwavering. Now I've been more than patient, but this is no longer acceptable. The receptionist hesitated for a moment before glancing at the young man with the walkie-talkie who had been standing by the entrance earlier. Can you call Gina from events? She asked him, her voice almost robotic. The man nodded and disappeared into the back of the hotel. Jason didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to assert his position. He wasn't just anyone. He had built Roberts Technologies from the ground up, and now it was one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, but he would ensure that those around him recognized him for who he truly was. As he waited, Jason noticed two of his board members walking out of the elevator. They were wearing conference badges and chatting with a hotel manager who had appeared out of nowhere to greet them. They were promptly escorted to the back without a second glance at Jason. He raised his hand slightly, hoping to catch the manager's attention. The manager hesitated, then turned away, completely ignoring him. The frustration within Jason built, but he remained calm. He wasn't about to let this hotel's staff dictate how he was treated. This was his event, and he had the power to ensure it went smoothly, regardless of the obstacles in his way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Gina, the event coordinator, appeared. She walked briskly toward Jason, holding a folder in her hand, her face flushed. Mr. Roberts, I'm so sorry for the delay. We weren't informed that you'd arrived. Please come with me. The Redwood room is ready and coffee is being served for the investors. She gave him a polite smile, but there was an air of discomfort in her eyes. Jason didn't respond to her apology. He simply nodded and followed her, his presence now commanding the space around him. The staff who had once dismissed him now parted like the Red Sea as he walked past them, their expressions tinged with embarrassment. As Jason entered the conference room, he knew this was more than just about today's event. It was about setting a standard. He wasn't going to let anyone, especially not in a space he had helped create, make him feel like he didn't belong. He had worked too hard to get here. He had built a company from nothing, and now he was ready to make sure that the world saw him for who he truly was. Not just a CEO, but a leader who wouldn't tolerate disrespect. The room was already buzzing with investors and tech experts, all eager to hear his keynote, but Jason's thoughts were clear. He had already won today, not with anger, but with action, and he would continue to lead with the same quiet strength that had gotten him this far. Jason stood still in the lobby as the murmurs of the arriving guests filled the air. His calm demeanor never wavered, even as the staff continued to look past him. The same faces that had ignored him earlier, now avoiding eye contact. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tension in the way the hotel employees moved about. It was as if they were slowly realizing that they had misjudged him, but none of them were willing to admit it. As the minutes ticked by, Jason's thoughts were clear. He had already been more than patient. Today wasn't about proving who he was, it was about making a point. He was a man who had built a tech empire from the ground up, yet they had treated him as though he didn't belong. The power dynamics were shifting, but it wasn't about him playing the role of the aggrieved. It was about setting an example for those who came after him, the ones who would face this same treatment, the ones who would need to find their way in spaces not built for them. The seconds seemed to stretch, and Jason's resolve grew firmer with every moment he stood there silently waiting. The moment felt surreal, as though time itself had decided to pause, observing the unfolding of a quiet confrontation. The receptionist, still at her post, continued to tap at her keyboard, and the security guard who had earlier given Jason the once-over now busied himself with some insignificant task. Jason stood as though he were invisible, his quiet presence louder than any protest. It was in this silence that the staff's realization began to dawn. They had made a grave error, but they wouldn't acknowledge it. Not until someone stepped forward to correct the mistake. The receptionist, who had previously dismissed him with little more than a glance, now seemed to sense the weight of Jason's quiet authority. But before she could offer any words, the event coordinator Laura appeared. Laura approached him, a noticeable shift in her posture. She was carrying a folder, her steps brisk, and her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and professionalism. "Mr. Roberts," she began, her voice a touch too loud, as if to cover up the tension that lingered in the air. "I am so sorry for the delay. We weren't informed that you had arrived." Her words felt rehearsed, almost mechanical, but Jason didn't mind. This wasn't about the apology itself. It was about what came next. He nodded slightly but didn't speak right away. He could see that she was doing her best to play catch-up, trying to salvage what was left of their professional image. "Please come with me," Laura continued. "The Redwood Room is set, and coffee is being served for the investors. We're ready for you." Jason took a deep breath, still not allowing any hint of frustration to show. He gave a slight nod, but said nothing in response to her apology. Instead, he straightened his suit jacket and looked Laura in the eye. "Laura," he said in a calm, measured tone, "I appreciate the effort, but this isn't about ego. It's about respect, professionalism. I'm not here to create a scene, but this morning I was treated as though I didn't belong here. Not because of my role, but because of how I look. That is the failure I'm pointing out." Laura's eyes flickered with a moment of discomfort, but she didn't interrupt. Jason continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "This isn't about me. It's about the message this sends to everyone else who comes through these doors. What happens here today will matter, not just for this event, but for the many who will follow. This event is my responsibility. I'm the reason it's happening. That's why I'm standing here now." Jason paused for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. The staff around them was now noticeably uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact. Jason could feel their unease, but he didn't let it affect him. It was important to him that they understood. This was not a matter of personal pride. It was about setting the bar higher. It was about maintaining the respect and professionalism that every leader, regardless of their background, deserved. "I'm not interested in making anyone feel small," he added, "but I won't tolerate being ignored because of assumptions that others might have about who I am or what I can achieve." He spoke slowly, his words clear and deliberate. "I've built this company, I've earned this position, and I will continue to lead with the same level of respect that I expect from others." As he finished speaking, Jason's gaze shifted toward the rest of the hotel staff. The receptionist, who had barely looked up at him before, now had her head down, focusing intently on her computer screen, perhaps too afraid to acknowledge him. The security guard and other staff members stood off to the side, their faces a mixture of shame and surprise. They hadn't expected this quiet resistance, this calm assertion of power, but Jason wasn't looking for a confrontation. He simply needed them to understand that their actions had consequences, and that he, as a leader, would not let such actions go unnoticed. With a nod from Laura, Jason began to move toward the Redwood Room where the investors were gathering. As he walked, the staff reluctantly parted to make way for him, their eyes averted in the quiet recognition of their mistake. The power dynamics had shifted, but it wasn't about him claiming victory. It was about him making sure the event continued smoothly, without further disruption, and with the respect it deserved. As he entered the Redwood Room, Jason couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. Not because of the confrontation, but because he had handled it in the way that mattered most. By continuing to move forward, the event, his summit, would proceed as planned. The people who were there for the right reasons would stay, and those who weren't would be left behind. Jason didn't need to shout or create a scene. His leadership spoke louder than anything else. Jason stood in the Redwood Room, looking around at the well-organized tables, the sleek name placards, and the soft hum of early conversations. But his thoughts weren't on the summit itself. His mind kept drifting back to the events of the morning, to how he had been treated. His phone buzzed on the table in front of him. It was Michael, his assistant. Jason glanced at the screen, knowing what was coming. "How's everything going?" Michael's message read. Jason stared at the words for a moment, feeling a wave of frustration rise within him. He had worked tirelessly to organize this event, had secured high-profile investors and industry leaders, and yet the hotel staff had made him feel like an outsider in his own space. The humiliation was still fresh in his mind, but Jason wasn't one to give in to anger. He was used to being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, but today it was different. He wouldn't let it slide. Jason stood his decision already made. He straightened his tie and stepped to the side of the room. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to make a scene. He had learned long ago that real strength lay in control, in knowing when to walk away. He tapped a few keys on his phone, sending a quick message to his operations team. "We're relocating the summit. Contact everyone, move them to the Haze. Give them the new details, cancel the remaining bookings here." Jason set the phone down and took a deep breath. The decision was made. He had built Roberts Technologies from nothing, and he had no intention of letting anyone tarnish its reputation or his leadership. If the hotel wasn't going to respect him or the event, he would move it somewhere that would. It was a bold move, relocating the entire summit with less than an hour's notice, but Jason remained calm. His team was efficient, well-trained, and accustomed to handling high-pressure situations. Within minutes, they sprang into action. The investors, many of whom had already arrived, were quickly informed of the change in venue. Jason's assistant, Michael, was already coordinating logistics with the Haze, ensuring that all attendees were redirected smoothly. The staff at the new location welcomed the group without hesitation, understanding the gravity of the situation and ready to accommodate them with open arms. Jason trusted his team, knowing that they would handle the transition flawlessly, and it didn't take long for the room to fill with chatter again. The energy in the new location was different, more welcoming, more professional. Jason felt a quiet sense of satisfaction as he moved through the crowd, greeting guests with a firm handshake and a smile. As Jason made his way through the new venue, he reflected on the events of the morning. It would have been easy to let anger take over, to make a scene, to confront the hotel staff with all the bitterness he had accumulated. But that wasn't his style. He knew that the most powerful response to disrespect was to move forward with grace and determination. His focus was on the summit, on the people who mattered, the investors, the speakers, and the guests who had come to learn, to connect, and to collaborate. He didn't need to prove anything to the hotel staff. They had already shown their true colors. Instead, he turned his attention to the room full of eager professionals ready to discuss the future of technology, investment, and innovation. That was the space he wanted to be in. Despite the frustration he felt earlier, Jason remained composed. He moved seamlessly through the new venue, engaging in conversations with investors and colleagues as if nothing had happened. His team had executed the venue change flawlessly, and the event was progressing without a hitch. Jason was here for one reason: to lead, to share his vision, and to ensure that the summit remained a success. Nothing, not even the hotel's poor treatment, would derail that. He was in control, and he would not allow anyone or anything to take that from him. By the time Jason reached the stage, the last of the investors had arrived, and the room had settled into a quiet buzz of anticipation. He looked out at the audience, at the faces of the people who respected him, who valued his work. This was the moment he had been preparing for all week. The challenges of the morning, the setbacks, the moments of humiliation, they were behind him now. As he stood at the podium and adjusted the microphone, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to speak, to share his message, and to lead. He didn't need to call attention to the hotel's failure. His actions had already spoken louder than any words could. Jason took a breath, adjusted his tie one last time, and began his keynote address. The room was silent, the investors hanging on his every word. The summit was now officially underway, and Jason Roberts was in full control. The hotel, the staff, the treatment he had received, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the future, the work he was doing, and the people who respected him for it. As the first few sentences of his speech rang out, Jason knew that the most powerful response to any challenge, to any disrespect, was simply to keep moving forward, and that was exactly what he was doing. As Jason stood at the podium in the newly relocated venue, delivering his keynote speech, the original hotel he had booked for the summit was slowly descending into disarray. The staff, who had previously dismissed him and treated him with such disrespect, were now scrambling to salvage what they could. Word had spread quickly about the events of the morning. Guests who had arrived early, including some of the top investors, were starting to realize that the hotel had failed them. They began to cancel their bookings one by one, some quietly, others with frustration in their voices. The sense of disillusionment in the air was palpable, and the damage to the hotel's reputation was becoming evident. Those who had once trusted the luxury of the hotel were now reconsidering their disappointment turning into action. The venue that was supposed to reflect success and prestige now felt like a tarnished symbol, one that had failed to live up to the expectations it had promised. Inside the hotel, the receptionist who had dismissed Jason earlier was now at the center of the chaos. She was fielding calls from the guests who had either left or were on the verge of leaving. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're currently experiencing some issues with the booking system," she could be heard saying into the phone. "Please allow us to offer you a complimentary stay for the next few nights," but her attempts to salvage the situation were futile. The guests who had initially been eager to attend the summit were now pulling out. They had seen the way Jason was treated, and it left a sour taste in their mouths. The management team, who had been so sure of their hotel's reputation, were now scrambling to try and keep things together. They were offering free upgrades, free meals, and even free nights at their sister hotels, hoping to appease their clients and prevent further fallout. But it was clear to everyone involved that their efforts were too little too late. Back at the venue where Jason had been speaking, the story of what had unfolded at the hotel was quietly spreading. Word was traveling through the business community, reaching the very investors who had come to hear him speak. Jason's actions that morning were not just a lesson for the hotel staff, but a powerful message for everyone in the room. The story of how he was mistreated, how he had been treated as though he didn't belong, was resonating deeply with the investors. They weren't just hearing about a CEO standing up for himself, they were witnessing a moment of quiet strength, of leadership in action. The way Jason had handled the situation with calmness and grace spoke volumes about his character. The investors who had come to hear about tech innovations, investments, and future ventures were now also learning about the importance of respect and professionalism in every business transaction. Whether big or small, Jason wasn't just building a company. He was setting a standard for how business should be conducted. The hotel's management, after realizing the full scope of the damage, began to send out desperate apologies. They reached out to Jason, offering personal apologies and asking for his forgiveness. But Jason knew that no apology could undo the harm that had been done, not just to him, but to all the guests who had witnessed the situation unfold. The trust had been broken, and the only way to rebuild it was through a consistent demonstration of respect, not just in words, but in actions. Jason's decision to relocate the summit was a silent but powerful response. He hadn't shouted, hadn't made demands for retribution. He had simply moved forward, taking his event to a space where the respect and professionalism he demanded were already in place. That, in itself, was the most powerful statement he could make. In the days that followed, the fallout continued. The hotel's reputation, once shining and immaculate, was now under scrutiny. Industry leaders, tech investors, and even casual business travelers were now reconsidering their future bookings. The once prestigious hotel had become a symbol of what happens when a company's professionalism falters. It wasn't just Jason's event that had been affected, it was the broader impact of how they had failed to recognize and respect their clients. The business community was watching, learning from the missteps that had been made, and Jason's quiet stand had sent a message far beyond the walls of the hotel. Respect and professionalism are non-negotiable. Jason, for his part, didn't gloat or bask in any perceived victory. He had moved on, focused entirely on the success of his summit and the opportunity to engage with investors and tech leaders. But he knew the message had been received. His decision to relocate, his calm demeanor, and the quiet dignity with which he had handled the situation had made a lasting impression. Jason wasn't interested in revenge or public displays of outrage. His goal had always been to set a standard, not just for his company, but for the industry. By moving forward without reacting in anger, he had shown the world that the most powerful way to handle disrespect was with dignity and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. As the days passed, the hotel's management continued to face questions about their handling of the summit. Business leaders and potential future clients were now questioning whether they wanted to risk being treated the same way. The damage had been done, and it was irreversible. Jason's quiet stand had proven far more impactful than any confrontation or public outcry ever could. It wasn't about the hotel. It was about the broader lesson in professionalism and the power of standing firm, not through words, but through action. As the summit wound down, Jason felt a quiet satisfaction wash over him. The day had been a success in every way that mattered. Investors were engaged, discussions were productive, and new opportunities were born. But in the back of his mind, the events of the morning lingered. He had handled the situation with the hotel as best as he could, maintaining composure even when his patience was tested. But now it was time to take the lessons learned from that experience and turn them into something more meaningful for his team. Jason knew that leadership wasn't just about taking charge when things were going smoothly. It was about how you carried yourself when the pressure mounted, when things didn't go according to plan. And that was what he wanted to instill in his team, especially his junior analyst Ethan, who had been watching him closely throughout the day. Jason gathered the team in one of the private meeting rooms after the summit had officially ended. The air was filled with a sense of accomplishment, but Jason could tell that there was still a quiet tension among his team. They had all seen how things had unfolded that morning, how Jason had remained calm despite the disrespect, and how he had ultimately moved the entire summit to a new venue with just an hour's notice. Ethan in particular had been quiet all day, and Jason could see the wheels turning in his young analyst's mind. Ethan was sharp, eager to learn, and full of potential. But he was also still figuring out what it meant to be a leader in this fast-paced, often unpredictable world of business. Jason knew this was the perfect opportunity to teach him something that would serve him for the rest of his career. "Ethan, I want to talk to you about something." Jason began, his voice steady and calm. "You saw what happened this morning. I know it wasn't easy to watch, but it was a lesson in leadership, one that doesn't come with any fanfare or applause." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with curiosity. Jason continued, "Leadership isn't just about taking charge when everything is going well. It's about maintaining your composure when things aren't, when you're tested, when people underestimate you, when your authority is questioned. That's when you have to show what you're really made of." Jason paused, letting the words sink in. It's about setting the tone, not just for the team, but for everyone around you. When things went sideways with the hotel staff, I could have reacted with anger. I could have shouted, caused a scene, or demanded an apology. But I didn't. I chose to handle it quietly and professionally because that's how you maintain control. That's how you lead with dignity. Ethan nodded slowly, taking it all in. Jason could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed the message. Jason wasn't looking for a show of gratitude or a quick response. He wasn't interested in his team simply agreeing with him for the sake of it. He wanted them to understand the deeper meaning behind what he was saying. Leadership wasn't about ego or showing power. It was about the quiet strength of remaining calm under pressure, the strength to make decisions in the face of adversity, and the strength to keep moving forward even when others expected you to falter. Jason's own journey had been built on those very principles. He had faced countless challenges, had been overlooked and dismissed, but he had always maintained his dignity, and that was a lesson he hoped to pass on to his team. Jason took a seat at the head of the table, his eyes moving from Ethan to the rest of the team. "This is a journey we're all on together," he continued. "I've learned a lot along the way, and I've had my fair share of moments where I felt like I didn't belong. But what I've realized over the years is that true leadership isn't about seeking approval or validation from others. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels they can thrive, no matter where they come from or what challenges they face. Leadership is about creating a culture of respect where every person on your team knows that they matter and that their contributions are valued. It's about being the kind of leader who can step into any room and make people feel like they belong, regardless of their background. Ethan leaned forward, clearly absorbing every word Jason said. Jason smiled, knowing that this was a pivotal moment for him. Ethan had the potential to be an extraordinary leader, but it was up to him to internalize these lessons and carry them forward. The most powerful leaders I know aren't the ones who demand respect. They're the ones who inspire it. They don't walk into a room expecting people to bow down to them. Instead, they walk into a room and make others feel seen, heard, and valued. That's what leadership is all about. It's about building trust, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Integrity and humility. Jason's words were clear and deliberate. Each sentence carrying the weight of years of experience. Jason's reflection on his own journey was both personal and professional. He thought back to the early days of Roberts Technologies, when he had to fight for every opportunity and prove his worth to people who didn't believe in him. Those moments had shaped him into the leader he was today, but the journey wasn't just about the triumphs or the big wins. It was about the quiet moments of leadership, the ones where no one was watching, but where his actions spoke louder than any words could. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about proving himself to others. It was about showing up every day with integrity and making decisions that aligned with his values, and that was a lesson he hoped to impart to every member of his team. Jason stood up the meeting, drawing to a close. "Remember this, everyone," he said, his voice firm but encouraging. "True leadership is about creating an environment where people can thrive. It's about making sure that everyone around you feels like they belong and that no one is ever overlooked or dismissed. We lead not by seeking approval, but by showing others that they are seen, heard, and valued. And if you ever find yourself in a moment of doubt, just remember this leadership is not about the title you hold, it's about the impact you have on the people around you." With that, Jason looked around the room, his team now fully engaged, understanding the weight of what he had just shared. As they filed out of the room, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had not only led the summit to success, but he had also taught his team a lesson in leadership that would last far beyond the walls of this conference room. If you enjoyed this powerful story of leadership and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more inspiring stories that showcase the strength and integrity of true leaders. Share this video with others who need to hear how quiet strength can shift the balance of power, and be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change the way you see leadership. Join us as we explore more moments where action speaks louder than words, and don't forget to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on the story. What's your definition of leadership? We'd love to hear from you.